Cloud. Well, thank you, Jane. Did you do that on purpose? You didn't want to see yourself on the tape? No, go ahead.
That's it.
Okay, it's recording. Garrett.
All right. Okay, now it's official.
Now
Got to
sufficient.
sit up straight. But everybody, thank you so much for joining us for our monthly meeting for the Southeast Michigan group. And we're excited to have, both our speaker, Mike here, who Jerry will introduce in a moment, and really happy to have Elaine Coleman, our Michigan chapter director, joining us right now too to share some information and updates with us. But at the sort of like outset, what we've been, just one announcement to share, kind of what we've been talking about as people have been joining in terms of the Southeast Michigan Group's executive committee. Been talking about the opportunities for getting engaged at the executive committee level for our group, the Southeast Michigan Group. And one way to do that, if you'd like to, is to nominate yourself or someone that you think would be a great leader in addition to our work in the Sierra Club in the region. And so we have elections for some open spots in the executive committee, and that election will be happening in December. And so the nominations committee right now is accepting those nominations. You can nominate yourself or someone else that you think is a great addition. Jerry just put in the chat the information about the nominations committee and the election. And my email is in there, garrett.dempsey@sierraclub.org. I'm one of the 3 people on the nominations committee. So for the next couple of weeks, we're consolidating who the folks are that are going to be on the ballot for the election. And so if you are interested, please reach out to me. And even if you've just got some questions, and you're not quite sure, but you just want to learn a little bit more, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I guess I'll add one other thing to some of the things that, like we were talking about, activities, things that the executive committee does. One of the things that we've been discussing of late that we're excited to sort of figure out for 2024 is, to try and do some more things in person. The Zoom meetings is a great way for everybody to be able to, come together, and we're going to keep doing that. But, we want to find ways for us to be together in person as well as also, whether it's for meetings or working with the chapter to revive more of the outings, which is so much a part of like the Sierra Club's lifeblood and history. I know Joanne Cantonia is here with us and longtime outings leader for Southeast Michigan Group. So that's something that we hope we can be a part of, sort of bringing back to the way that we as a community can be together and also to connect with the environment as well as, not just protecting it. So with that, I would love to just introduce Elaine and give her the floor to share with us some of the good news that she has.
Awesome. Thank you all. And thanks, Garrett and Jerry, for letting me crash your meeting tonight. I know I see some faces and names that I recognize and some folks that I haven't met yet. So hi, my name is Elaine Coleman. Usually you will see my name and email as Elaine Elliott. I got married in April and finally got around to changing my name. So it's Elaine Coleman now. I'm really excited to be here and excited to see all of your faces and hear a little bit more about the work that you all are doing in Southeast Michigan Group. I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to pop in and say, first, thank you, because I know so many of you do all the important work to make sure that the Sierra Club and Michigan chapter continue to function. I can't say enough how much I appreciate that. And then a special thank you for folks who have been reading all our emails about the clean energy bills that are going on right now, or sharing information or making calls to their elected officials at the state level to let them know that we want to see a really strong clean energy package. And if you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, I will drop a link in the chat that talks about some of our legislative priorities right now around clean energy. We're really hoping that a vote comes down soon. I believe Christy came to the last meeting, and Christy and Tim have been in Lansing all week, really fighting to make sure that we get some of the things we want. So feel free to read more about that. Jane gave a wonderful introduction and talked a little bit about the importance of federal investments and asking the federal government to help us execute certain things related to climate. So I also wanted to share that we're launching a community advocates program to help us at the local level figure out what we can do to make sure that our like city, county, state government spends funds from the Inflation Reduction Act appropriately. And so I'll drop the link for that in the chat. We're going to have a kickoff meeting on December 7th in person at the Michigan chapter or the Sierra Club Detroit office. Let me drop that in. And last but certainly not least, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that nominations are open for chapter awards. So that's handled by the nominations committee, which is a part of the executive board for the entire chapter. I know you all are doing great work. We would love to hear more about the important work that you're doing. So please take a look at the document and the nomination forms. If you or someone you know will be an excellent recipient, then by all means, please nominate them. And those awards are typically announced at the top of the year. And that's really all I have today. I'll also drop my email in the chat if you want to talk to me more offline. I'm happy to meet with folks and say hello and kind of get to know you better. So I will drop that as well. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thanks again for coming. Sorry, I stepped on you, Jerry, but I'm basically passing it over to you now.
Okay, well, we're going to introduce a speaker here, Mike Buza, today, and the topic is solar energy, fact or fiction. A little bit about Mike. He received a BS from Michigan State University and a master's in social work from University of Michigan. He spent most of his professional year working with the seriously and persistently mentally ill, but has been involved in environmental activities his entire life. He's the current chair of the Sierra Club Nipissing Five Rivers Group and is also the chair of the Legislative Committee of the Michigan chapter of the Sierra Club. He has written numerous articles that have been published in the chapter newsletters and other publications and has been quoted in the newspaper and magazine articles. He has spoken in favor of wind and solar in over 100 township meetings. He was on the Energy Production, Transmission, Distribution, and Storage Work Group, which provided research information to the Governor's Council on Climate Solutions. Mike maintains an educational Facebook site, Michigan SEA, which stands for Sustainable Energy Advocacy. He has had rooftop solar for 13 years, and for the last 8 years, it has provided all his energy needs. And without further ado, Mike Buza.
Thank you, folks. Let me do my share screen stuff and we'll get started. I assume that's up right now. Okay, getting some nods. Very good. What I'm going to be talking about today is what happens in a lot of the there's a lot of information goes on, and it's really at this point in time providing a serious block to progressing on our renewable information or renewable energy that we need to be having at this time. It's vitally important, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how important it is and how much of a issue that we're getting into, how this misinformation is spread around. It's very interesting how this happens, and also we're going to talk about the actual facts that's going on. What I will present in my presentation is the sources of my information. I'll also talk about some of the sources of the misinformation that goes around. I try to have reliable sources, and I cite them throughout my presentation. Well, just a second here. There we go. Okay, this is just a kind of quick slide, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with it, but just to give you some information, some idea of what's going on with renewable or with energy production right now. The gray area right at the bottom here is coal, and it's dropping dramatically. Now it ends in 2019, and it's dropping even more dramatically, and is supposed to hopefully be pretty much eliminated from our state in just a few more years. The yellow area up in here is natural gas. Now, a lot of people talk about natural gas and how great it is because it doesn't put out as much carbon. It's not as great as people make it out to be. When we look at natural gas, we need to look at from production to combustion, and the production part of it is pretty scary. The middle one is nuclear, and they've kind of staying about the same. Here's the problem. About 13 years ago, CBS did a study on the nuclear power plants in our nation, and they found out that 75% of them was leaking radiation. And I'm sure they haven't got any less leakier in the last 13 years. In fact, since they're getting older, it's probably worse. At the top, you're not seeing too much. This at the top lines, this is renewable energy. Now, there's been a lot of growth in renewable energy since 2019, when the end of this chart is. It's now at about 15%. But according to the law, some of the things that we do with conservation and that sort of thing counts towards renewable energy. So even though they say it's 15%, it may not be entirely 15%. Solar system beats fossil fuel and nuclear on all metrics. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. Cost, the cheapest energy right now is wind and solar. Health, of course, there's lots of health issues that goes on with fossil fuel use. Safety, there's lots of misinformation goes on about the safety. And here's one of the interesting ones that we're going to talk about. If you use solar, you will actually be using less farmland than you are for combustible sources of information or sources of electricity and energy. Also, revenue to the community, since most of these places are put these nuclear, or excuse me, boy, it's very sensitive. Since most of these, got to go back a couple. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Revenue to the community. Sorry about that. Revenue to the community. Since most of these are put right into the community, it affects the community directly. Not only do the landowners receive a fair amount of money that they spend in the community, but also there's tax revenues that comes to the community that otherwise would not. This is the Coke Empire. Now, I wouldn't get into a lot of the details of this. The purpose of this slide is to show that these fossil fuel entities have a large reach into a lot of areas. Probably the biggest one that I want you to pay attention to is the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. They receive lots of money from the Coke industry, and they send out a lot of false information on fossil fuel. One of the things that you will hear, and I hear a lot at the township meetings, is people say, I've done my own research, and will be very adamant about that the research is done well, and they've done a lot of it. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is a famous astrophysicist, says if you want to confirm your own biases, do your research on the internet. One of the things that happens is the fossil fuel companies have made arrangements, and we'll talk about this in more details, so that if you do research on a certain topic, that their information is the first things that will show on an internet search. You got to look at where your information comes from, and that's what does not happen. And sometimes you have to dig down a few layers to find out. Some of the areas that some of the organizations that are very have a lot of information on the internet is API, which is American Petroleum Institute, the Heritage Foundation that gets lots of money from coal, oil, and natural gas, E&E Legal. Some of their members of their executive committee is former coal executive. Heartland Institute again gets lots of money from fossil fuel. One of the people that's been getting a lot of attention lately in Michigan is a gentleman called Joshua Antonini. He says he's a research analyst, at the Mackinac Institute. And as we said earlier, a lot of the information or a lot of the money going into the Mackinac Institute comes from the Koch brothers. The other thing you need to be aware of, and we're going to pick on Google here a little bit, and there's a reason I'm picking on Google for internet research. 91% of the searches done on search engines is done through Google. And what Google's algorithm is such that once you find something that you like, it's more likely to direct you to that area again. So if you get some false information or get some information from sources that's not reliable, and you pay attention to it, Google's more likely to refer you back to those sources again. I mean, part of it's also to make you happy, but also it starts creating a echo chamber. Here's one of the things, if you look up on Google and you look up sustainable energy, and you can see what I did together. This is a screenshot. Google and green energy, and you get lots of wonderful information. And this is a search that I actually did through Yahoo. And if you look at the bottom, it says Google archives 4 consecutive years of 100% renewable energy. One of the things that now for the rest of the story. The rest of the story is Google has a lot of technical knowledge. Right now, if we did the same type of oil exploration that we did like 50, 60 years ago, we'd have a great oil shortage. It's because some of the technological advances that they have done is that we have as much oil on the market that we do now. And Google has signed contracts to support the enhanced extraction of oil. And here's some of the companies that they have done signed contracts with. So even though they're running their operations on the front, with 100% renewable energy, on the backside, they're doing a lot of support of extraction of oil. The other thing is, Google does a lot of accepts a lot of money from fossil fuel for advertising. It says Google Adverts. This is from England. They call their advertising adverts, and they're pouring millions of dollars into greenwashing. And one of the reasons that this is important is that about half the people who do research on things, the first things that you have coming up when you do a research on Google's search engine is ads. Half the people can't tell the difference between ads and search engine results, and so because of that, because of that, they have a lot of people that are confused because they think they're getting research results when actually they're getting ads from fossil fuel companies. Some of the common misinformation that comes from that's going around is that solar panels poison land and water. They use valuable farmland, lowers property value. A lot of people complain that solar panels are not being recycled. But the problem is that you don't look at the whole picture. And that's one of the things that we're going to be doing is looking at the entire picture. Solar is replacing a lot of coal plants. Coal in this country, coal waste is 120 million tons each year. It's the third largest amount of waste product that there is. Number one is household waste. So when you're talking about recycling solar panels, there's a lot of false information that's going on there. Here's the other thing. I talked in my introduction, I talked about 13 years I've had solar panels on my house. I was like one of the first people to have solar panels on my house with Consumers Power. In fact, I was so early with them that they did not have established policies on what to do with this. And there was lots of negotiation back and forth because they didn't have these established policies. And I don't even remember them having any solar farms around at that time. The issue is that solar panels are guaranteed for 25 years. If I've had them for 13 years and are guaranteed for 25, there's not really any solar panels out there to be recycled at this point in time. And so when people start complaining that people aren't recycling solar panels, it's because the market's not out there. Now, there are a few solar panels that get decommissioned or that break early and that sort of thing for one reason or another, but that's kind of a false information that they're using at this time. What happens when the sun doesn't shine? We'll talk a little bit about that. And solar panels emit electromagnetic pulse. I'm sorry. This is very sensitive, and I just barely touched these. Okay. Going the wrong way. I apologize. Here's some of the things that's happening too with global warming and why we need to address it really quickly. Trees are becoming more vulnerable to drought, fire, and that sort of thing. That's one of the reasons we're having these increased fires that we're having. With all the carbon in the air, the food is actually becoming less and less nutritious. Food supply is becoming less predictable because we don't know what kind of weather we are. I hear farmers talk all the time saying that the weather is changing and it's becoming more and more challenging for them to raise crops. We used to get about a third of our fruits and vegetables from California. With the 12-year drought that California had, that has changed. And when they did finally get rain, they got like 2 years worth of rain in a very short period of time. United Nations at this point in time says if we keep going down this road, they're predicting a hungry future for a lot of the areas in the globe. Here's the scariest one from me, John Rockstrom. He's a joint director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. You may have not heard that before, but they're kind of a big organization on climate research. And he says that if we keep going down this road, agriculture may not be possible. That for me is a very scary proposition. And it's already started too. We talked about what's going on in California, but the Department of Agriculture is finding out that they're having to put out more money for weather-related crop insurance. And that has steeply risen over the last 22 years. We're talking in Michigan with this last year and across many states, we've been having lots of smoke come out from the Canadian wildfires. And I don't think people appreciate how big of area is starting to burn because of the Canadian wildfires. And Washington Post earlier this year, they talked about They talked about 13.3 million hectares has been burned, and this is August of 16th of 2023. As of October of this year, that's been 17.8 million hectares. That's equal to the equivalent of 1.1 times the land area of Michigan. And so when you're talking about this is transforming entire landscapes because of all these wildfires. And these wildfires are burning big trees. People talk about planting trees to help battle climate change. But the problem is the trees that are burning, it takes a couple guys to reach around. The trees that we're planting is about as big around as your finger. So, there's some serious issues with the tree planting. What you're seeing here is some spontaneous combustion that's going on in the Arctic. This is a picture from Siberia, but it's also happening in Alaska. what's happening is as the earth warms, there's more and more of the methane that's being frozen in the tundra is being released. And it's starting to explode spontaneously. Now, there's a couple of different methods or theories on why this is happening. Some of it thinks that people are just, or that the methane is just increasing so much pressure as it grows because of the warming and increasing in volume, it just creates an explosion. Some people think that, or some of the scientists think it's because some kind of spark sets it off. But these are huge explosions, as you can see, the gentleman right here standing next to the edge of the crater. The other thing that's happening, and this is from the BBC, is zombie fires. We have these fires up in the Arctic, and I had a hard time the first time I heard that there was fires up in the Arctic that was going on. I mean, this is areas that you think of just snow and ice and that sort of thing, and you have these fires that's going on up in the Arctic, and eventually, supposedly, they get put out because their snow comes down, they get buried under 3 or 4 foot of snow and that sort of thing, but they don't really go out. What happens is they smolder underneath the snow for months, and when the snow melts and that sort of thing, the fire reemerges. So basically, you never can kill the fires. So what they call zombie fires. This is according to Harvard. There's 8 million worldwide increased deaths because of fossil fuel emissions. This is a lot higher than they previously thought. This is back in 2018. And these numbers are increasing because more and more people are starting to die because of heat-related deaths. These deaths that from this study is primarily from lung and cardiovascular disease. Air pollution costs about $8 billion per day, according to research from Yale University. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Atmospheric carbon. Back before we started burning all this fossil fuel and that sort of thing, atmospheric saturation of carbon was about 280 parts per million. James Hansen, who you probably heard of, he's extremely famous scientist, and has brought the attention to the United States, the problems with this, says we should not go above 320 or 350 parts per million of carbon if we're going to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Currently, actually, as of March of this year, the atmospheric carbon level is 420 parts per million. Now, that is in March, and this is steady going upwards, so we're probably a few points higher than that at this point in time. Now, according to Dr. Bill McGuire, if we add in the effects of methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas, we're probably at more like 500 parts per million. Methane is about 84 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas than carbon. Now, you'll hear various figures on this. Sometimes you'll hear figures as low as 20 times more powerful than carbon. And the reason is methane as a greenhouse gas loses its effectiveness relatively quickly. I mean, the carbon in the air lasts, tens of thousands of years. Methane's only tens of years. So when you look at it at a period of time, the methane loses its effect. However, because it is in the atmosphere and so much more powerful, it also creates more carbon because one of the things that happens when we talked about the fires in Michigan, the more fires there are, or excuse me, the fires in Canada, the more fires there are, the more carbon that goes in the air, the more carbon that goes in the air, the more fires there are. And we're hitting a tipping point with that. Many of the scientists are concerned that we already have passed the tipping point for forest fires, that they're going to be kind of a positive feedback mechanism. Some of the other things, and this is what I was talking about earlier, at the point of ignition, the methane puts out lots less greenhouse gas or carbon than like coal or some of the other methods of combustion. But the problem is leaks, and there's a lot of leaks that go on with carbon, or excuse me, with methane in its production. The Permian Basin, for instance. Now, Permian Basin is in the area of New Mexico and Texas, and a lot of our natural gas comes from that area. But they leak enough methane to heat about 2 million homes, according to a study. Nord Stream, you probably heard of Nord Stream. That was the pipeline that ran from Russia to Germany, and it mysteriously blew up at the beginning of the Ukrainian war. The Russians blamed the Americans blamed the Russians, but no matter what happened, who's to blame, that leaked about 500,000 metric tons of methane. Aliso Canyon, most big utilities store their natural gas in the summertime. They get extra natural gas in the summertime when the prices are cheap, and then use it in the winter when there's a high demand. And they store it in underground caverns. Aliso Canyon was one that stored natural gas in California. It started leaking, and they couldn't stop the leak. And this was from about 2015 to 2016, approximately 6 months that this was leaking. And during that time, it leaked out 97,000 tons of natural gas. And all this stuff increases the carbon in the atmosphere. I talk about Russian roulette when I'm talking about housing and that sort of thing, because right now what we have going on is what happens going on right now is that housing is being affected basically because of hurricanes, increased number of hurricanes, of power, not so much the number, but the power of hurricanes, which is affecting more and more houses. We're having increased more wildfires. California is having large areas of large areas of their territory being burnt, and these houses, excuse me, these houses are being affected so much that insurance companies are beginning to refuse to insure in certain areas. California, a number of companies have left California and refused to insure any new houses. Things happen in Florida and in Louisiana. You will hear at a lot of these township meetings that I go to that they're losing extreme amount of value to their houses. You're hearing claims of 20, 30, and 40%. There was a study done on 1.8 million houses recently, and they said nearby solar decreased housing prices by 1.5%. Now, 1.5% is a far cry from the claims of 20 and 30 and 40%. The other things that's happening because of this increase of weather, inclement weather, is that flood insurance is starting to go up, and some places is not being able to be gotten ahead. Also, there's areas that are starting to build dikes. Galveston, Texas is starting to build a dike out in the bay to start protecting themselves from the effects of hurricanes. New York City is talking about that because the increasing level of the oceans because of the global warming. They're talking about building dikes to protect themselves, and these are all increased costs that's going to be have to be taken up somewhere. And this is part of the problem, is that and what the anti solar people want you to look at is they try to get you to look at one problem and focus on that, and you need to look at the bigger issue. Here's a result of the study I was talking a little bit earlier, a graphic study. And there's actually some areas where there was solar being built nearby that increased in value. California increased about 0.9%. Connecticut increased about 1.6%. Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, New Jersey all lost value. If you look at this in total, the decrease in value is about 1.5%, which is again a far cry from the claims of 20, 30, and 40%. In fact, the 1.5% is within the margin of error of the study. Nuclear plants. This is one of my favorite. A lot of people talk, let's go with nuclear. That's one of the ways to go to help deal with the global warming. There's only been 2 plants that's been attempted to be built in the last 30 years. One is in Georgia. They originally estimated that the cost for this would cost $14 billion to be completed, and would be completed in the year 2016. The first of the 2 reactors, it's a 2-reactor project, was completed in January this year. The second reactor is projected to be completed in December of this year. Instead of being $14 billion, it's going to cost $43 billion, which is about 3 times as much as what is originally projected, and many years longer. And here's the other thing: is there's tons of lawsuits around this whole issue. Who is going to pay for this extra cost? Is it going to be the developer? Is it going to be the utility company? Is it going to be the consumers? And the people that seem to be winning on this is the lawyers, because there's tons of lawsuits going around this. The other one that was attempted to be completed in the last 30 years is one in South Carolina. It was abandoned after 6 years. In 2017, they spent $9 billion on this and eventually abandoned it. The local newspaper, in a sarcastic article, said they spent $9 billion to dig a hole in the ground to fill it back in. We're talking about recycling, and I talked a little bit earlier that there really is not a recycling market, but there is lots of valuable materials in solar panels. Aluminum, glass. The glass is very high quality glass. These things are made out of hurricane proof glass, so that if a hurricane hits, that they're less likely to be damaged. There's silver, copper in these also. So there's lots of valuable materials. Here's the thing: is it is easier and cheaper to just throw these things away than it is to actually recycle them. But there is a solution to this. The solution is to put a deposit on. If you put a deposit on each solar panel, about $30 to $40, like they do with pop bottles and cans in this state, then they do become a valuable enough material, and that type of scheme would be make it worthwhile to recycle them. Talked a little bit earlier about how we could have use less farmland by using solar on the farmland than would be using it for current purposes. According to the USDA, 25% of farmland is planted in corn. Over 33% of that corn is used to make ethanol. That means about 8% of all farmland is used to make automobile fuel. If we only use 2% of the farmland, and these figures vary somewhat, it's anywhere from 2 to 4% of farmland to produce all of our electrical needs. We'd only need 2 to 4% of the farmland to produce all of our electrical needs. And that's probably about a third less of the current fuel footprint for using it for automobile fuel. Here's some of the equivalents that we have for that. It's equivalent to the farmland that we would that is being used right now for railroads would be the equivalent of farmland that we would need for solar. Less than half the area of active oil and gas leases is right now. Also, if we look at the amount of land that's being used for solar, it's less than a third of the area currently needed for ethanol production. And only slightly more than the area that land that's disturbed being used for coal mines. Health and safety impact. This is done by NCSU, which is North Carolina State University. They looked at some of the damage that people talk about solar panels being damaged and it leaking poison into our environment. Hurricane Matthew went through a number of solar fields and there was zero damage to the actual solar panels. Some of them got blown off their mountings and that sort of thing, but there was no damage to the solar panels themselves. Hurricane Sandy, there was some minor damage to the solar panels, but there was no leakage of any material within the solar panel itself because, like I said, they're built like hurricane windows. The only toxic material in a solar panel is a little bit of lead solder. And it would take 750 solar panels to equal the equivalent of one car battery. And yet we have a car battery in front of our cars going 75 miles an hour down the highway. And I say that's a lot bigger risk than having a little bit of lead in a solar panel. The other thing that's misinformation that's passed around is they say there's cadmium in solar panels. And yes, indeed, there is cadmium, but it's cadmium telluride. Cadmium telluride is a very low toxic material. It's kind of like saying to your house, you're having hydrogen pumped into your house and you should be aware because it could blow up. Yes, you are having hydrogen pumped into your house, but it's also combined with oxygen, which makes water, which makes it a low risk material. And this is the same thing that's happening with the cadmium and telluride. So the information that is being presented that cadmium is in the solar panels is really false information. This is the Ludington Pump Hydro Storage. If you look down here, there's these power lines, and this was originally built in the 1970s for nuclear power. Nuclear power, you cannot shut it down. So when you start up a nuclear power plant, it runs. But it's an issue of demand meeting supply. And during the daytime, when there's lots of factories running and lots of other things going on, there's a big demand for electricity. At night, not so much so. So what they would do with this is at nighttime, they would pump water from Lake Michigan, which is right in here, up into this reservoir, which is above the Lake Michigan shoreline, and they would store it up there. During the daytime, when more was needed, they would let it run down, and it would be kind of like a hydroelectric dam. It would produce electricity, and so this is kind of the third biggest battery in the world. Clean energy because it's all pumping water uphill. An interesting point is that this can supply water for up to 1.8 million households. It also has the sixth biggest electric motors in the world, 500,000 horsepower motors. Pump water up into this reservoir, and then it runs downhill when needed at the thing. And it can be used for solar also. But it'd be in reverse fashion. The solar would pump water up during the daytime, and at night, when the sun is not shining, it could be used for a reservoir. And we're also having a lot of development in batteries right now. Iron batteries that can hold a charge for 100 hours would be very good use for. Is also a new technology that's working out well for storing electricity. More and more people are having the lithium ion batteries in their homes, so the storage issue is being solved. This chart, excuse me, this chart shows the projected amount of solar installations that would have to be had to provide electricity for us. Here's the issue. The gray area is the utility scale solar that's projected to be needed. The blue area is non-residential, and the which is like factories and maybe other businesses that would put solar on their home. And the dark blue area at the bottom is, excuse me, is rooftop solar. So if we really need to, a lot of people talk about, why don't we put this on the roofs? We don't have the capacity really to be able to do that right now. It's the utility companies that have the capacity to build these out quick enough to meet the needs, and also to avoid the worst of global warming. This is an interesting map. One of the options that we have is that and they're starting to do on an experimental basis, and in some areas on a wider area basis, is they're actually doing farming underneath the solar panels. If you look at the legend, the crop production, they're actually doing crop production underneath the solar panels. And these are generally kind of small, 5 or 10 acres. There's also, they're doing pollinator friendly habitats, and that's the bees that you see around. Graze, and that's being done on large scale. I mean, if you have 1,000-acre solar farm, they're doing pollinator friendly habitats. In fact, I have in my cupboard what they call solar honey. It's honey made from these pollinator friendly habitats. And one of the benefits of the pollinator friendly habitats is that it not only helps with providing food, but it also helps provide habitat for some wildlife besides the bees. The grazing, they have some large scale grazing of sheep. There's a couple farms down in Texas that have over 100-acre sheep farms, and they're small greenhouses that they do. If you look here in Wisconsin, there is a lot of bees in Wisconsin. Why is there so many bees in Wisconsin and not so much in the other areas of the United States? And the reason is that they have laws that promote the planting of pollinator-friendly habitat underneath their solar panels. One of the laws that's proposed in Michigan right now, if it passes, would make Michigan look a lot more like Wisconsin in a number of years. So, that's, the laws that we have out there, I think people don't realize the benefits of all the different laws that they have out there right now. Okay, I think I missed one. What can we do to help this whole issue out? Number one, reduce your fossil fuel use, and that's a small thing, but I think it has a powerful impact. One of the things I have, the other thing is the solar siting reform, and that's probably the law that we have going right now that can have, in my humble opinion, that can have the biggest impact right now. Probably earlier this year, I was talking to some of the developers, and they were saying 60% of the townships had ordinances that were so restrictive that they would not be able to develop any solar in that township, and that number has grown since then. So we need to have some solar siting reform. Write letters, call elected officials. Probably the biggest impact they can have is getting the proper elected officials. The reason we're able to make the progress in legislation and that we have at this point, and we'll see how much progress we have made in the next week or so, but it's because of the elected officials that we have. We got a Democratic Senate, we got a Democratic House in Michigan, and a Democratic governor. So it's more likely that these laws will be passed. And I think we need to start making uh, elections depend on renewable energy, global warming, and that sort of thing. We are in a very dangerous spot, and unless we start making our officials start paying attention and think that for them to be reelected, that the environment matters, we're not going to make the progress that we need to do. Rooftop solar is a very good way to go. Right now, I think that there's a one of the proposed bills out there would raise the rooftop solar to 10% if it passes. I think that's a significant area, because when a new technology comes out, when you hit about 10%, it starts taking on a life of its own. So if we can get that law passed and more people start having rooftop solar, I think it will take on a life of its own. And that's kind of the end of my presentation. Sorry for the rough presentation as far as getting the slides forwarded. Is there any questions?
Hey, Mike, this is Garrett. I've got one. I really appreciate all the information you just shared with us. In terms of like agriculture and the potential for maybe some agricultural land in Michigan to be used for solar, and then it also have habitat that it can support, like they have over there. Was that it? I can't remember if it was Wisconsin or
Wisconsin,
Minnesota.
yes.
In Wisconsin. I mean, are there what kind of agriculture field is there? Is it a whole range, or is there a particular type of maybe sort of crop or a type of agriculture that might be sort of converted where they're going to use it for habitat instead now and solar?
With this current technology, the top two things that's easily to do is pollinator friendly habitat, and again, with you can get honey and that sort of thing, and sheep. And the reason is for sheep is they're animals that are low to the ground, so you don't have to get so high off the ground. The other thing is sheep are kind of gentle animals. You have to have some if you start having cattle grazing underneath solar panels, you're going to have some pretty robust infrastructure underneath to keep them from damaging the solar panels. So those are the two main ones. I think it's in this state, Western Michigan University is starting to do a pilot program, so to speak. But most of fruits and vegetables are small projects, like I told you earlier, 5 to 10 acres at maximum. It's hoping that the technology will advance later on, so we can have a wider variety of of uh, of uh, of different types of crops underneath. But running big tractors underneath these things is not really practical at this point in time, and it increases the costs. But again, let's look at the bigger picture of things. The cost of not having food at all, if we continue on the way that we're going, and some of the other costs that we have is substantial. The next person, Richard, I believe.
I want to start out, Mike, thanking you for the presentation, which is quite a bit of information for your work in this field. But my question is, what can a bunch of city slickers who live in Metro Detroit area do about the siting problem, which is predominantly in rural, non-democratic areas of the state?
Well, here's the thing is, I mean, the legislature is broken down according to population. So your legislature has the same vote as the other. The other thing is, the thing that's not appreciated enough is a lot of these factories, the coal plants, the gas plants, these polluting plants, is in highly populated areas. Somebody's paying somehow. And right now, it's the highly urban areas that is paying the price because of the pollution that's coming from these factories. So, I'd be mad as hell if I lived underneath a coal plant and somebody does not want to have solar panels because they don't look pretty. And that's a lot of times their thing. We don't like the way they look. I mean, what's fair here? So, you know, getting your legislator to, and some of the legislators that are being hesitant are folks from urban areas. So I think we need to let people know that, we vote, and we vote on environmental issues, and you need to do the right thing and write letters and that sort of thing. The people that are from the rural areas are very much, there's been a lot of studies done on the number of people, and probably about 75% of the people support renewable energy. It's that 25 that make 5% that makes all kinds of noise and show up at the township meetings and that sort of thing, that scream and yell, that are blocking our progress at this point in time. So we need to raise our voice up and have it heard. And like I said, write letters, and let the legislators know we care as much about this as the people from rural areas, even more so. Marty. Marty, are you next, or should I go on to the next person? Okay,
Here I am. I'm sorry about that.
that's all right.
I couldn't find myself for a minute. My question is, why do you think that the major utilities are so slow to be active in this solar siting world in the rural areas? And why are there so many companies coming from outside of Michigan? And in one case, in Sanilac County, the county north of me, there's a solar energy company from Ontario that's trying to put in a solar field. But what is the problem with, why isn't DTE Energy and Consumers Energy doing what I think they should be doing right now?
Actually, DTE and Consumers are both trying to build solar, well, mainly solar right now. In the last several years, previously, they were trying to do wind also, but they may be more active than you realize. I think DTE has either 5 or 6 developers that are going to various areas in the state trying to get solar farms built at this point in time. But the problem is, and this is what happens, this is their formula, they find a place that looks like it has a friendly ordinance, a township that has a friendly ordinance. They say, oh, gee, this looks like a township we could work with. And so they start approaching landowners and saying, would you be willing to lease your land? Now they're offering these landowners $1,000 an acre a year, per acre per year. And if you farm it, you only can make about $400 or $500 an acre a year. So, they're crazy not to take it. So they take the money, and then the word gets out. The people who own smaller parcels of land start screaming that you're poisoning us with these solar panels. We don't like the way they look, this, that, and the other thing. And they ask for a moratorium on the current ordinance. They have a moratorium. They changed the ordinance in such a way that it is no longer financially viable for these companies to do it. I attended, I think about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer, the planning team for Consumers Energy, and there was probably about 20 people in that room. So I mean, they are, I think, trying to do this, is that they're being blocked, and this information is coming from the fossil fuel companies. And they will have something. In fact, once they have this, they also, one of the things I didn't mention, and thank you for bringing this up, they will start a Facebook site that that you're not allowed in unless you agree, because I was in one for a while, and they says, unless you agree that these solar panels are horrible things, you're not allowed to stay here. And they kicked me out. And that again becomes another echo chamber for them to spread disinformation. So I think they're trying to, maybe not as aggressively as they should, but I think if we had the proper legal structure, you would see these growing much more quickly. But you're right. There's also a lot of out-of-state companies that are trying to develop here. This could happen quickly if we have the proper legal structure for it to happen in. Does that answer your question, Marty? All right, Barry.
Yeah, hi, Mike. Thank you for your presentation. You actually just answered part of my question, I think. I guess I have another question just sort of in response to that. I can't help but think that I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I'm kind of coming out of a sense of how communities work, or an interest in how communities work. I can't help but think that there's something in the ways these developers or the the utilities are approaching the communities, or that might not be the perfect strategy, or that there could be some better way of working with these communities to neutralize or to avoid that kind of opposition. Maybe working, reaching out proactively to those smaller landowners. So I guess my question is, do you see openings for strategizing, ways to strategize together with the utilities or the developers to figure out, like, to bring some social science skills, I guess, community outreach skills, to try to avoid that opposition? Or do you know of studies, research that is looking into this?
There is a project just starting right now, Ranger Power, which is out of Texas and has made has some developments in the state and has attempted to have a number of others and has not been successful, is working with MIT to bring all parties to the table to talk about this. And they're doing it in Livingston County. I'm trying to think of Chahocta and Conway townships are working with. And like I said, they're trying to do exactly what you're suggesting, to try to see if there's some kind of common area that they can come to. And we will see what happens. That's going to be a much slower process if they're successful at it. And I don't know if we have the time for that sort of thing. I mean, unfortunately, I mean, we're running out of time. If you listen to some of the reports coming out of the UN, you know, they're screaming at us. The scientists are screaming at us. It's like, we're past time. We're going to suffer big time. We need to turn things around immediately. So I think that's been tried on a number of things. There's been a lot of very intelligent people to try to address this. But here's one of the things you got to remember. If we electrify everything, we're going to put the fossil fuel companies out of business. This is a $1 trillion industry, not billion, $1 trillion industry. And we're talking about putting them out of business, and they're not going to go down quietly. And so they have also their own social scientists that they're using in a more nefarious way and have been very successful at this point. So it's being tried. There's a lot of brilliant people trying to work this out, a lot of brilliant minds. I'm going to be interested to see what happens with the MIT experiment. So, but like I said, they're just getting the people together from the townships. They're identifying some of the leaders in the townships to start this process out.
Thank you. Do you have any links or contact information for people to learn about that particular project? Any chance?
I do not. I was contacted because I'm very active in this area, and they contacted me. I've worked with Ranger Power in the past, and so they contacted me and asked if I knew some people in the area, and so I gave them some names. I can see what I can do for you. You can have my web or my email address, and we can, as I find out more. This is just happening. Like I said, that this is very, very, very brand new. So I will see what I can find out. I still got some of the contacts from MIT, the people that contacted me. I'll get you my email address, and we'll see what I can do for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Gene.
Hey, hey, Mike, could I just interrupt for a second and just there's a couple of questions in the chat, but I want to see if Jean wants to ask her question right now in response to the
Okay,
Barry's
I'm not
question.
seeing the chat, so thank you. Thanks for letting me know.
Sure. Jean, can I go to those questions first, or would you like to ask yours now? You can just give me a nod up or down. You're on mute. I can't hear you. Jean, you're on mute. Gene, you're still on mute. So I'm going to ask Dennis's question because he put it in the chat like about 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes, and then we can get to you, okay?
Well,
Okay.
there's one in the chat that I think is very interesting by Dennis Hawk, and that's about use of brownfields, especially in Saginaw and Flint. So I think that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, and Mike,
Yeah,
so like his question said, why don't we look to use brownfield factories which have been closed and or torn down to start this? Like much of Flint, Saginaw, for instance. That's
right.
Dennis's question.
One of the things that has happened that I find very exciting, one of the pieces of legislation that has passed is give tax incentives to brownfield sites. The taxes on well, this is kind of complicated. I'll try to simplify it without destroying the information, because it's a complex piece of legislation. Right now, for like on farmland, you would pay about $7,000 per megawatt hour in taxes. If you do it on a brownfield site, it would be about $2,000. So there's some serious tax incentives to do that sort of thing. So the state has done what they can. On a more practical level, there's also a number of issues that comes with that. If you got a brownfield site and it's sealed, you got to be careful on how you develop it. You can't be driving posts through someplace that's got a top seal of some sort for solar panels. So there's that issue. Now you can use ballast, big cement blocks to mount your stuff instead of driving posts in the ground, but then the price starts becoming more expensive. Basically, some of the barriers are basically have to do with financial sorts of things. I mean, these companies are pressed to keep your electricity prices down and that sort of thing. So, and some of the things too has to do, solar panels may change the runoff slightly. And if you got a contaminated site, you got to be careful with that sort of thing. So there are areas doing that. The state has done the one piece of legislation they have passed around here. It does provide some financial tax incentives to do that sort of thing. We might see some more of that. The other thing is economy of scale. A lot of the brownfield sites that you see around, and I've seen a map of them, and there's bunches of them around, but a lot of them are like old gas stations and smaller sites. And when you start doing smaller sites, there's the economy of scale that starts getting in the way. I mean, for utility, they're looking at like 500-600 acres minimum, probably more like 600 acres minimum. And a lot of the brownfield sites aren't that big. Now, if we pass community solar, which, I'm hearing is kind of the odds are against it, then that would become a little more financially viable to start developing some of these brownfield sites. So it's kind of a complex issue. A lot of it has to do with not making a bad situation worse by developing it for solar, but some of it's financial. But I expect to see more of that to go on in the future, and I think it would really start going on if we were able to pass the community solar law.
I'm just bouncing around some of the chat comments right now, and one about siting, because you're talking about it. Dan just asked, with 70% of the earth covered by water, why don't we hear more about offshore solar?
That one again would be financial. I want to be honest about all my information, and there are some water solar, for instance, in California. They're putting solar panels over some of the water especially since California is has such problems with water at this point. Some of their areas are putting water over some of the rivers and that sort of thing to prevent evaporation, so that they have water. So that kind of does a 2-for-1 sort of thing. In the ocean, I would bet the cost of that would be pretty high. Would be my guess. I don't know that for sure, but there's a lot of great minds that's looking to do this wherever they possibly can. And since that's not I haven't seen very little of that in the literature, except for like areas in California over water. I think that probably the cost would be the main aspect for developing that.
Yeah,
and that's speculation on my part.
Thanks for doing that, though. Sharing your knowledge there to speculate. Steph asked a question for our plant and animal friends. Said, how do solar farms impact the local plants and animals, and are they displaced by that kind of installation?
It depends on how this is written up, and this is one of the things that I think having a state law instead of local ordinances was help. Because one of the things, and I've read the proposed state bill for this, and one of the things that they address is having pass-throughs for animals, so that it doesn't affect the animal traffic so much. That the fencing that goes up around them would be so much off the ground, so the smaller animals could go through, and then they would have certain areas where the deer could pass through. The other thing, though, is again, the current state proposed bill has pollinator native grasses, native flowers and that sort of thing. So they're finding that the areas that do this, that small animals and that stuff are flourishing in these areas, because they're kind of reverting back to areas to the type of landscape that they had hundreds of years ago by planting these pollinator friendly. And that again is part of the proposed state law that goes out. So if that gets passed, that's going to certainly increase the environmental friendliness, if you will. But even without that, some of these, because of these criticisms, some of the solar developers are starting to react to this and starting to do some of this on their own. It certainly would be a lot quicker if there's a legal mandate to do that. But like I said, there's many of the developers that are starting to do some of this on their own.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to direct people's attention into the chat. Elaine had shared a couple of updates and some links. For example, the Sierra Club just released a report in early October on utility climate pledges, and it has some info on DTE and consumers. That was one of the questions earlier was asking about those two companies, and also a press release from the Sierra Club. And Gene, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
That way I can see
everybody. Yeah. Gene, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
No, I wanted to talk about the brownfields, which you did. Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions that folks have for Mike?
Okay, I'm going to put my email in the chat in case people need to contact me. Oops.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike.
I've already got it in there, Michael.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah, you put it in there.
I already put it in.
All right, thank you so much.
Double checking though, like is it HE original
D as or
Zuba?
the original Zuba at yahoo.com.
I just so I think we're missing the T at the beginning of that email as it's
Okay, let
listed in
me,
there.
Michael, why don't you drop it in then?
Okay, I'll put it in.
Okay.
And while Mike's doing that, Jared, do you want to tee up for folks the next speaker, or what we can expect in terms of some of our next meetings coming up?
Well, it's actually going to be in February because we don't have a presentation in December or January, and that's going to be Amanda Herzog. And I don't have her information in front of me, but she is running for city council, I believe, in Royal Oak.
Well, thanks for that information. Keep people just give them a little bit, right? And we can and wait for more updates as we try to stay warm over the next couple of winter months. I hope that the winter season is treats all of you well. And again, Mike, thank you so much for closing out our 2023 speaker series. Really appreciate all that information.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for having me.
All right, you all. Thank you for joining us, and really best wishes. Stay safe, stay warm, and we will see you again in February.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.